Twice a year, millions of Japanese go upcountry to pay respect at the graves of their ancestors and to have a reunion with living members of the family. Ask them where they're going and they'll say, "To my furusato." The word refers to one's old home place, the place of your personal roots. But the idea of the furusato also reverberates through that great national conversation in which Japanese talk about who they are as a people and wonder what is happening to their collective roots as a culture. The idea behind the furusato is that Japanese culture is rural in its very essence, that every family can trace its line back to a village someplace. For many years, I have worked with people in Iwate Prefecture in northern Honshu. I've seen them commit their energies both to preserving the old crafts and festivals and to creating a new contemporary culture. But if you actually live out here in one of the furusatos of regional Japan, then you've got a problem. It's a problem familiar to residents of small towns in America and Europe as well. Nowadays, being connected to the old home place just does not generate the excitement that comes from being plugged in to the global media village. Metropolitan Japan is sending these people mixed signals. It wants them to sustain the dream of a Japanese Camelot where everyone lives together in harmony and honesty. But at the same time, daily life out here flows with the same confusing currents that flow through the central cities. Regional people monitor the latest fashions as eagerly as do their cousins in Tokyo and Osaka and Kobe. People in Iwate want to have just as special a role in Japan's international future as they do in its parochial past. So few people are living in remote hamlets anymore that graveyards go uncared for and parish temples fall into ruin. Some families even dig up the bones of their ancestors and move them to the city too. Then they destroy and bury the gravestones. When this final tie to the furusato is broken, do the living become culturally homeless? Japan's corrugated landscape breaks the country into scores of small upland basins, river valleys, and coastal plains. In the past, each little locale was far enough in space from its neighbors that it evolved its own dialect and customs. Across that landscape, as generation replaced generation, new ideas and symbols and technologies replaced older ones in a kind of historical slow motion. An area such as Iwate often borrowed new items of culture from its neighbors, or even from the elite tradition of the distant capital cities in Nara or Kyoto or Edo. But there was time to absorb what came in, to transform it, to put a local stamp on it. That ended a century ago. Even remote regions lost the protection of distance. With its railways and telephones, the modern state could do what earlier rulers only could dream of doing. It imposed a standard language and uniform laws, uniform schools and standard time. Local cultures rapidly began shedding the marks that had made them distinctive. Each region held on to a few pieces of its hometown heritage, and some communities caught national attention as repositories of tradition. In Iwate, the most famous of these is an upland basin called Tono. Almost everybody in Japan knows about the legends of Tono. Everybody's favorite is the legend of Oshira-sama, a handsome horse.
Long, long ago, a poor family had a beautiful daughter and a handsome horse. The girl grew more beautiful with each year. She spent long days with the horse, laughing and listening to him, chin in hand and elbows on the fence. "What are you doing all the time out there with that horse?" asked her father. "Why, Father, one day I'm going to marry him," she said. Her father was outraged that a horse could even think about getting married to a human. He went and hung the horse from a mulberry tree and stripped off its hide. The hide fell around the daughter as she lay there crying, wrapped her up, and carried her away to heaven. 4 nights later, she appeared in the same dream to both her parents. In apology for misbehaving, she told them to feed mulberry leaves to the little horsehead insects that would appear next spring. The insects would spin silk cocoons. By weaving the silk and selling it, the parents at last would earn a comfortable living. To show their thanks, the parents took wood from the mulberry tree and made little statues of the girl and the horse. And that's how we came to have statues of Oshira-sama. Oshira-sama is a god who will tell you things. Take care of her, and she will tell you good things as well as bad. And that's the end of the story.
Tourists come from all over Japan to Tono to hear the legends. Some of them leave messages for Oshira-sama, asking her to bring them good news. The legends are recited in a place called Folktale Village in the center of Tono City. The main building in the village used to be an ordinary inn, and back in 1909 it had an unusual guest. A young writer named Yanagita Kunio had heard about the Tono stories and came to check on them personally. His book about the legends of Tono eventually caught on and became a classic. Yanagita resigned from his post as a Tokyo official, turned to scholarship, and went on to become the leader of modern Japanese folklore studies. Tono went on to develop itself into the nation's furusato, everybody's old home place. Here as elsewhere, the preservation impulse leads to saving old farm buildings along with old inns. The centerpiece of an educational park called Heritage Garden is a magaria, an L-shaped farmhouse, something like those that used to be common in New England. People live in the main part of the house. The L is for animals. Magaria are another Iwate tourist attraction. Some Tono residents are taking the idea a step further. They're tearing down old magaria and relocating them on the site of a future magaria village. Inimi Matsuda is the project's leader. "We're not allowed to plant as much rice as before," he told me. So we have to find other ways to make use of our land.
We
plan to move 2 houses this year, and eventually 12 in all.
Visitors will be urged to stay in Magaria village for several days, not just walk through and take snapshots. They'll have opportunities to sample the chores and toil of old-fashioned country living, along with its sensory pleasures. Matsuda is making the rounds of his neighbors' attics and storehouses. He rummages for old tools and decorations to put on display when the village opens for business.
Looks like it dates from the 1920s, or even earlier, doesn't it?
I suppose they were still wearing masks like that for festival dances back when we were kids. So I guess it ought to date from 150 or 200 years ago. Haven't dug that out and looked at it for 50, 60 years.
This is how you wear it?
You've got it backwards. That goes to the front. It's a bird. That's how you wear it.
Matsuda has organized a group of farm wives from the neighborhood. They practice reciting the Tono legends. It's in preparation for the opening of Magaria village. Visitors are certain to ask about legends, he said to me. And when they do, we won't be embarrassed. We'll recite one for them right then and there. Most of the women have to learn the legends from books, in versions that were recorded earlier in this century. For a few of the older women, though, legends shade into living memories. Stories about strange happenings must have been told all over Japan in the old days. Here in Tono, you can still see the real caves and marshes and rocks named in the legends. And you can touch a real river at a spot where kappa, water sprites, used to come up and make trouble. One woman remembers her father telling about how he saw a kappa drag a horse down under the water until it disappeared. Another woman actually met a kappa herself years ago when she was crossing on a footbridge. His huge head, as big as her hat, frightened her, but she was able to get away unharmed. The lost world of the legends of Tono has been so enchanting to so many Japanese that this small city has become a very important spot on the national map of Japan's cultural heritage. One could even say that if Tono did not exist, it would have to be created. The legends are an obvious source of local pride, but the cultural tourism which they have inspired has placed the people of today's Tono in an environment of paradox and irony. The world of the legends is as distant from late 20th century Tono as it is from anywhere else in Japan. Living Tono is not a walled-in Disneyland. People's amusements and aspirations here line up with what's happening everywhere else in Japan and in the world. Living Tono is reaching out to the global village through student exchange programs with the United States and Germany, and a sister city relationship with Salerno, Italy. One futuristic sketch has put Tono as the site of Japan's first interplanetary spaceport. From time to time, conferences are held here on the so-called Tonopia concept. It's a populist vision derived from the work of the 20th century folklorist Yanagida Kunio. That vision holds that a culture of ordinary people living ordinary lives in little communities is inherently creative. It is indeed the secret wellspring of Japan's cultural vitality. For Tono today, the challenge is how to keep that spring from being drained dry by external demands to preserve this site as a basin of legendary history and mystery. It's only a short ride from Tono into the Towa Basin, but the atmosphere feels different. With only fragments of tradition left, Towa has more freedom to face the future. Like anywhere else, people here imagine the future in terms of their children's lives. Tanabata festivals are celebrated all over Japan, but in Towa, they showcase the school marching bands instead of the slow beat of old festival drums. In order to live in world society, the children need to speak its common language. Towa and some other Iwate communities are using their own money to hire language teachers directly from the United States. One of those teachers set up a student exchange program between Towa and his hometown, Wisconsin Dells. One reason I travel to Iwate often is to help these communities in their search for American teachers.
Are you a teacher?
This program was started by local initiative long before the Japanese government launched a national program along similar lines.
I'm a teacher at the Towa Junior High School.
Are you a student?
Towa isn't waiting for the kids to grow up. It's pushing adults, too, to become involved with that wider world.
どうしたらいいのかと。それでそこを考えたんですね、最初に。
We asked ourselves, how do we get this town moving? Everything is centered on Tokyo. Everything gets decided there. So we've opened a new communications center here, plus an office in Tokyo that we call our antenna shop. Town employees go down to the antenna shop for several months to sell Towa products, keep their eyes and ears open, and send information back here. Every year we also pay for a few of them to take overseas study trips.
言葉なんですけれども。
やはり日本だけにいるとどうしても固まった考え方にしかならない。
If you've only lived in Japan, your mind gets stuck in a rut. I had two reasons for going. I wanted to see what it's like living in another country. And I particularly wanted to find out how Japan looks when you view it from abroad.
その人材の育成にはやはりこの視野の持つその偏見のない
We must cultivate our human resources so they turn themselves into genuine individuals, broad-minded and without prejudice. That's why we so strongly support exchange programs both overseas and in Japan. Domestically, as you know, we already have begun an exchange program with Kawasaki City down in the capital region.
Towa is becoming a new kind of furusato for residents of Kawasaki. Busloads of middle school students already are brought out for brief homestay visits. Next in the plan is for Kawasaki old people to come to Towa for summer vacations. One Towa woman has revived a folk craft form of weaving that recycles scraps of old cloth. Once it was common throughout Japan. She sells her work commercially and has exhibited it at a craft fair in Los Angeles. But the exciting part of it all is when visitors like these Kawasaki students try the process for themselves. Each of them weaves a square of cloth and marks it with his or her name, to be taken home as a treasured souvenir. Towa recently broke ground for a large-scale resort and recreation project on the shores of Lake Tase. The town, the state, and private developers all will have a piece of the action. Eventually, there will be facilities for boating and skiing and other types of outdoor recreation. That'll mean more jobs and local income. But it will also mean more people-to-people exchanges. The plan includes something called the Silver Bridge. That's Towa's name for living quarters on the lake for the senior citizens who will come out here from Kawasaki City. Where it can claim pieces of history, Towa wants to preserve them. The local statue of the god Bishamonten is said to be the largest single-block wooden sculpture in the nation. Carved nearly 1,000 years ago, it has been designated as an important cultural treasure. Woolen homespun has a much shorter history in Towa, but it too is part of the local heritage. Sheep and looms were brought from Scotland a century ago to produce winter uniforms for Japan's modern army and navy. It became cheaper to import wool from Australia and New Zealand 30 years ago, but homespun weaving remains profitable. It provides work for local women and draws apprentices from other regions of the country. Milk cows are a modern import, but for centuries Iwate raised its own breed of draft oxen. Tractors made those obsolete a generation ago. A new Towa specialty is breeding and raising cattle for meat. Kobe and Matsuzaka beef from western Japan long ago captured the market for high-grade steaks and sukiyaki meat. Now Towa is countering with its own East Japan beef. A beef barbecue and a cattle weight-guessing contest are features of the town's new-style Tanabata Festival. Across the road from the barbecue site, there will soon be a Towa interchange for a new express highway being cut through the basin. Then, as somebody said to me, it'll be visitors in, beef out. In the 20th century, nation-states have not been kind to local cultures, and Japan is no exception. Japan successfully built itself a standardized national culture. Now that very success has made people who live in regional towns and villages very uneasy. It's as if the central leaders want them to be in the national life, but not quite fully of it. They should be able to participate in the global village, but content to stay home and guard the Furusato. If the Furusato disappears, Japan's claim to have built a more humane industrial society becomes wobbly, because the claim rests on the idea that industrial Japan grew out of a culture of peaceful rice farmers, not of rootless, homeless cowboys. Over the past 40 years, the national rhetoric has attempted to replace the Furusato with the industrial corporation as the core image of Japanese society. The problem is, in Japan as in all industrial societies, the majority of the population does not work for large corporations, and plenty of people don't even want to. In the Tonos and Toas of regional Japan, all kinds of new initiatives are appearing. People are reaching out in some ways and turning inward for other things. They're trying to build connections that are more personal with those who live in the central cities. They are bypassing the national government to hire their own foreign teachers and set up their own exchange programs. And at the same time, they're looking inward and trying out new events and enterprises that can enhance local pride. The Furusato and the corporation have been closed communities for members only. Places like Iwate seem to be moving toward a new kind of old home place, one that is rooted locally, but open culturally to other people and to the wider world.